Beautiful. Wonderful way to extend your meditation.
Is your microphone off?
Probably not.
I think it's off.
Good. I'll just keep talking. Now, because I get to introduce someone with her own microphone, our very own Robyn Plante.
Thank you. Could you do me a favor and bring my water back by the creamer on the table? My water. Oh, thank you. Good morning. So good to see everyone here. Familiar faces and new faces, returning faces. What a beautiful song, Jack. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. So what a journey, huh? I heard last week it was a last minute switch over to the other building. Thank you. And before that, the storm. And then, I don't know what happened after that. Vacations. But today, rain or shine, we have our church potluck picnic. Yay! So I'd just like us to acknowledge all of the hands and hearts behind the scenes who have been setting this up. If you were part of that, please stand so we may acknowledge you and thank you. Yay. Well done. So my talk today is called My Way on the Highway. And that's not a typo of my way or the highway. But both of these have to do with our power of will, spiritual will, that we were exploring last month. And we're going to do a little bit more of that today, too. And it also ties into this month's power that we're looking at of order. Divine will is surrendering to divine order. So we're going to be looking at that more a little bit today and then as the month goes on. So what is the difference between personal willfulness and spiritual willingness? Can you notice the difference in yourself when one of those arises? Well, a young woman wrote about having a profound experience of God's will in her life. She wrote that she'd been on a diet and it was going pretty well, but she was still struggling a little bit. And one day she was headed downtown to do some errands and she realized she was going to pass her favorite donut shop that she always used to go to. And she had this thought that, oh, those world-class donuts, boy, a cup of coffee and a donut would really hit the spot right now. But then she remembered her diet. So she said a silent prayer. God, if you want me to stop for a donut, let there be a parking spot right out in front. Sure enough, the 7th time around, there was the spot. Haven't we all had times where our personal will was asserting very strongly? Yeah, I see heads, every head. Yes. And, think about New Year's resolutions. How many of you made New Year's resolutions in January? A few people, okay. How many of you are still following those resolutions? One hand, yay, okay. Well, personal willpower can have good intentions, but it doesn't have the staying power. And what does have the staying power is divine will. Divine will. Or we might think of it as God's will. But that might have some baggage with it if you've grown up in a traditional church where God's will maybe had to do with the punishing God. Did anybody have that growing up? Yeah. I remember growing up, going to church, that God's will was mentioned when things could not be explained logically. that, oh, a job promotion. I wasn't expecting that. Yay, God's will. Earthquake. Oh, no. Why? God's will. However, we know that God is not a being in the sky, favoring some and punishing others, or adding and subtracting to our lives at whim. Rather, in unity, we see God's will or divine will as the high road to elevated living, that essence of good coming forth and permeating our lives and all of life. The goodness itself asserting itself to direct and guide us, to experience living in heaven on earth. Isn't that a tremendous picture? This is the Golden Bridge in Vietnam. And I love that it's just such a metaphor for allowing God to lift us up on the high road, to see a higher vantage point, to see farther, to be held, those guardrails there, to be held safely on the high road. Because we know that God's will for us is absolute good, which means that whatever life serves up, that good can come from it. I remember in Unity, people would always just quip, it's all good, it's all good, it's all good. But some misinterpret this to mean that everything that happens is good. But not every event we would call good. Some we would call tragic, horrifying, difficult, heartbreaking. The Maui fires, not good. Tragic, devastating, heartbreaking. So may we continue to hold the people in our prayers for healing, for comfort, for justice too, to get their homes rebuilt and their lives in order. And we affirm that all the resources needed are already there and more on the way. So trying to push our personal will, if you think about problems in the world, personal will often plays a part, doesn't it? With greed or fear motivating and causing chaos. But surrendering to divine will restores order. So I remember that when I was graduated from college and I was looking for my first teaching job, and I may have shared this story before, but one of the first interviews I went to was really interesting. That I was a single parent, I really needed to start working. The only position open at the time was in the school that had the worst reputation. That the police were always going out there, the kids would get into fights, and I was like, I don't know, but I was pushing, like, I need to work, I need to support my kids. So I went to the interview, and feeling rather desperate, and I walked into the principal's office, and sat down, and he had this big desk, and he leaned back, put his feet on the desk, lit a cigarette, and said, "Why do you want to work here?" There was part of me that did not. I hadn't been to an interview in a long time, but I thought, I don't think this is normal. So long story short, I did not get that position, but I was hired by another school not too long after that was way, way better, supportive, a nurturing environment for me, especially as a new teacher. And I had learned a couple years later, when I shared this interview story with another teacher, she said, "Oh, that principal was known for harassing new teachers. He would go into their rooms every week with a checklist and criticize them, and most of them quit." So there was a divine order at work there that I couldn't see in my fear and desperation. But grace came in to close that door and steer me to something better. That's how I see divine will, when we can let go of our pushing, our fear, or trying to manipulate things, and just relax and let life unfold, because God is always trying to give us something better than what we can even conceive. Something better. So know that if you get a no, that's just a closed door that's going to lead you to something better. Divine will is to have all that is good prevail, and for our innate goodness to come forth, our eternal Christ to rise and lead the way, to prevail. Divine will is to bring the good of the absolute realm, the possible realm, into our material world experience. And God is always with us. For God is always in us. So as we dare to shine more brightly, we can develop our spiritual will through the power of willingness, commitment, and choice. So I want to talk about how those three can help us develop will and lean into divine order. So choice is the directional power of will. How many choices do you think you made this morning? Couple dozen. Yeah, and some we just make not even consciously, right? So every day there's so many choices in this buffet of life. How do we decide what to put on our plate? Well, desire plays a key role, doesn't it? And so we can't do, be, or have that which we don't desire. For example, I do not desire to be a ski instructor. So I will not even notice when skis go on sale or parkas are advertised or there's a snow day or a snow... That just is not in my realm of noticing. And I'm sure you have something like that too, that you're not interested in, so you don't even notice it. Your friend might, but you don't. So desire comes from often a restlessness we would call divine discontent. That there's something more, because Spirit is always nudging us to be the greatest version of our grandest self. And we all want a life rich with meaning, purpose, satisfaction, and connection. And our choices are attempts to achieve those desires. So our power of choice works best when we can employ discernment. So that's just like slowing down and taking a closer look at the parts. And really take time to be with the choice. And that can be tricky, especially when we want to decide very quickly, or we are pressured to decide quickly. But if we don't know, then it's not time to decide. So think about your life. Are you facing a choice right now? And if so, some good questions to ask are, which choice brings me a feeling of aliveness? Which choice brings me peace in my body when I think about it? Your body won't lie to you. It will tell you the truth. And so take these questions to prayer and let divine will inform you of the higher way to let divine order unfold. So once a choice has been made, the next element of activating spiritual will is commitment. So how do you feel when you hear that word, commitment? Commitment is that sustaining power of will. It's resolve to follow through, to keep going, even when it's tough or you don't want to. It's deliberate, intentional action to focus on the path, not flitting to and fro. I think of Irma Bombach. Do you remember her? I love her wisdom and her humor. And she once wrote, The grass may look greener on the other side, but it's just as tough to mow. So commitment is like this narrow gate that Jesus spoke of in the book of Matthew, chapter 7, verse 13. Enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many may enter into it, or through it. But small is the gate and narrow is the road that leads to life, and only a few find it. So metaphysically, that narrow gate is keeping our mind, developing the habit of focusing on what is true, affirmation, speaking daily truth. And the wide gate is falling into the ways of the world that broadcast separation. So the narrow gate, 1 foot at a time, 1 prayer at a time. Sometimes 1 breath at a time. So part of last month, I was fortunate to go on a spiritual retreat as well as my annual vacation. And I had a silent retreat at a beautiful retreat center that had a labyrinth. And I love labyrinths. I just think they're just such a tool to take us inward and is focus in that sacred place. And on this labyrinth, some of the lanes were quite narrow. I don't know if you could see on the right-hand side, there's my foot in the lane. And I have a tendency sometimes to walk the labyrinths fast, but I tried and I kept slipping on the stones. Like you had to slow down, take 1 step at a time, walk very carefully, and be mindful. And I really got at that. Isn't that like life? We just want to zip through as fast as we can. But to be on the path of the high road, divine will, actually ties in with divine timing too. We have to slow down, take a breath, be mindful. So that was a lesson. And this labyrinth was interesting because you could hear the crunch, crunch, crunch with every step too. So it was auditory, visual. There was a garden nearby that was a little fragrant. So it was a whole sensory experience. But 1 foot at a time, mindful, we do this life on the high road. Committing harnesses spiritual power. Vital forces of creation are unleashed and energy is directed. So it's that focus that moves the needle. Like the mountain climber W.H. Murray, until one is committed, there is hesitancy, a chance to draw back, always ineffectiveness. Concerning all acts of initiative and creation, there is one elementary truth. At the moment one definitely commits oneself, then providence moves too. Have you found this to be true? So where have you experienced the power of commitment? Maybe it's been in relationship, in marriage or partnership, or with your commitment to community, or with your career or vocation, or with your spiritual growth. That takes a lot of commitment, doesn't it? So commitment means not quitting, working through disappointments, setbacks, knowing that a comeback always follows the setback. So if you've had a setback in a commitment, know that a comeback is right around the corner, perhaps with the next step. Like the proverb says, success is falling down 7 times and getting up 8 times. So this last part is willingness, which is the fuel to make commitment possible. And think of Jesus. I seek not my own will, but the will of him who sent me. So he was always about his Father's business, wasn't he? Even when the Jewish leaders said, you can't do that on the Sabbath. But he was about his Father's business. And he suggested that if we too follow this way of living, that we will also live in the kingdom of heaven on earth, right here. I love this wisdom from Proverbs. It's one of my favorite ones. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct your path. That's surrendering, isn't it? Surrendering to divine will, to order unfolding. So how can we come to know God's will, or divine will for ourselves, and tap into that divine order unfolding? Well, here are some questions to contemplate during the week. Number 1, do you trust the God of your understanding enough to ask for good in all areas and situations of your life? Number 2, is there a place in your life where you are fighting what is? Are you willing to let go and call in divine order and listen for the next right step? And the third one, is there a circumstance where you're trying to force a solution, pressing for what you want and trying to control outcome? If so, are you willing to let go and let God? Some good questions to sit with this week. And so let's anchor into our willingness right now as we close with some affirmations. And I'll say them all once like a poem, and then I'll invite you to us to affirm them together. I am willing to remain attuned to the source of all good. My willingness for God's will generates miracles. My divinely guided choices stretch me and grow me into the greatness within me. I order my life with God, and God orders my life with good. So let's say these all together. I am willing to remain attuned to the source of all good. My willingness for God's will generates miracles. My divinely guided choices stretch me and grow me into the greatness within me. I order my life with God, and God orders my life with good. Thank you, God. Amen. Thank you.